good afternoon, good evening. My name is Dr. Anthony Kinslow II. Before I start, I want to first start by thanking a friend and fellow entrepreneur, Aaron Rice, for bringing me on for this conversation and for putting together and organizing the Baltimore Climate Tech 2024. And so with that, today and with the time that is mine, I want to talk to you about accelerating decarbonization. And in particular, that and what I hope to prove to you today is that focusing on equity and what I call AAA rating is essential to accelerating our decarbonization, both in Maryland but across the country. As I mentioned, Anthony Kinslow. I am a proud graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. So Aggie Pride for all those out there. I went on to do my master's and PhD from Stanford University, focused on sustainable design and construction and energy efficiency analytics. I consult for an organization that focuses on inclusive financing called Clean Energy Works. And I also am a lecturer at Stanford University, where I teach two classes, Racial Equity and Energy and Quest for an Inclusive Clean Energy Economy, both classes which I co-created in 2020 following the protests after the murder of George Floyd and obviously many others. I currently live in Springfield, Virginia with my wife, Maria, and my two boys, Marcus and Samuel, and really focus on this idea of bringing equity to the forefront. And I think it's important to understand that in this clean energy transition that we're going through right now, we have a great opportunity to address the racial wealth and health gaps that we have in this country. In that, when we talk about equity, we're not talking about going after people and buildings that don't care about this stuff. In fact, one of the main premises in the clean energy space is that Black and Brown communities are too busy to do this work, or don't really focus on this work, or don't care about this work because they have other higher priorities. But when we look at poll after poll done over the last decade, what we consistently see is that African Americans and Hispanic Americans have a higher degree of concern about climate change. They want to see more done and are more alarmed about climate change in general. So this study was done by Yale and George Mason University. Another study, same study that came out, but showing a little bit different, showed that Black and Hispanic Americans are more willing to advocate and campaign for elected officials to take action to reduce global warming. So I want to start this conversation by noting and breaking this premise that Black and Hispanic Americans don't care about this or have other things to concern about, that in fact, by focusing on these communities, we can actually target the people who care most about this. And one of the reasons why that I've seen in my time as an entrepreneur, my company Gemini Energy Solutions, which I'll talk to more later, is that we don't offer what I like to call a triple A rating. We need solutions out there that are available, accessible, and acceptable. Oftentimes, there are solutions that are not available in the areas, rural communities, for instance, or in the Southeast, or that the clean energy market is not marketing or advertising to certain neighborhoods, making it inaccessible, even though a solution is available, it's inaccessible. And lastly, you need solutions that are acceptable, right? Something that the community hears and thinks, yes, I want to do this. Yes, this is something I'm okay with. And so what I'm going to give you today is two examples that I'm working on around that have a solution that have a AAA rating, and talk to you about equity and how that further optimizes these solutions for greater success. So first, understanding equity. It's important to understand that equity has four kind of general components. The first is recognition, understanding a comprehensive knowledge of the community you're trying to serve. in the historic and ongoing inequalities, but also their skill sets and their attributes and assets that they have there. Next is procedural. That is including the community in the decision making, in the planning of solutions. Oftentimes, uh, eh, community engagement is seen as kind of just informing them about what you're going to do. And then the result of that is frequently pushback, missed opportunities, as well as just unaware of uh, challenges and risks to your project. Next is distributive. This is the equity that most of us think about, and that is who is actually receiving the solutions, who is actually adopting these solutions. And last is restorative. The idea of providing solutions that try to restore the inequities of the past, right? We talk about the 60s and the 50s where the GI Bill was not given to Black and Hispanic Americans despite them serving. We talk about redlining and how investing in infrastructure in Black communities was from a federal level down made riskier and by lending agencies. And so lack of investment in our communities was systemic and systematic. And so providing solutions that are restorative. However, when we talk about equity, we talk about these four framings of equity, oftentimes there's pushback in the space. And we're seeing that more and more of a perception that equity actually slows us down, that you either have profits or equity, that you can't have both. And so I'm hoping that today, the two solutions I provide kind of disprove that, but I also want to give another way of framing these four aspects of equity so that you can take it and have a way to talk about it in a way that is more maybe palatable for certain audiences. So the first solution is inclusive financing. And the concept of inclusive financing is that the utility pays for the building upgrades first, and then recovers their cost for that payment with a tariff on the bill. What that means is that the payment is not connected to the individual, it's connected to the meter. In other words, if a renter wants to improve their building, right now in today's society, in most of America, you have to pay for it, and maybe you stay long enough, or you have to get permission from the owner of the building to upgrade the building, but you never really receive the full benefits of that, right? And if you move, then the cost of and the debt that you took on to upgrade that space is lost. And so today's solutions don't really provide an answer for renters. It doesn't provide an answer for people who don't want to go into debt to improve their buildings. And so inclusive financing, where the utility is paying for it first, collecting the repayment from the tariff on a bill that is less than the actual savings, means that anybody anywhere can upgrade a building if they so choose to. You're making it accessible to folks and acceptable to folks. They no longer have to go to debt to pay for clean energy upgrades. What we've seen in terms of performance for inclusive financing is that debt-based solutions, when the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory did a study, they showed that 0.01% of eligible populations make the decision to go into debt to do a building upgrade. 0.01%, right? That's not going to get the job done. Alternatively, what we've seen from inclusive financing solutions in North Carolina and Kentucky and Arkansas, California, is that we're seeing levels of 3% of the eligible population saying yes to building decarbonization, to saying yes to building upgrades. And in some of these places, like Roanoke Electric Cooperative up here in rural North Carolina, we're seeing adoption rates of 3% within Black communities that is persistent poverty areas, right? Black and persistent poverty are two words you usually don't hear and think about when you talk about massive adoption of clean energy solutions. But that is the reality when you provide a solution that is available, accessible, and acceptable to the population. More than that, what we've seen is that when you add equity to it, so if it costs $10,000 to upgrade the building, but the savings are only going to be $8,000 over the life of it, then that's a $2,000 copay. And when there's a co-payment that a person has to do, the adoption rate is around 50%. So one out of two people will still say yes to that co-payment because they're still getting the value, a much larger value. But if you pay for that co-payment, right, which what I call equitable addition to this inclusive financing, then the adoption rate actually jumps to 90%. 9 out of 10 people will say, yes, I want to move with this. And so if our goal is to accelerate, is to increase more people saying yes to adopting building upgrades, then the idea of equity combined with this inclusive financing shows a clear improvement in that. The next solution is the work that my company does, Gemini Energy Solutions, in partnership with Green to Church, and that is what we call Clean Energy Hub. The concept, well, first starting with the industry standard for microgrids and revenue and resiliency hubs is that there's a lease model. The church or facility does not have any ownership, no control, and they maybe at best get about 10% of the revenue that comes from that, right? In the best case. Alternatively, we focus on ownership, control, and 80% of the revenue starting off, and that increases over time as we empower the church to take over and maintain these systems but through workforce training in the community, and so hiring locally, right? For us, the Clean Energy Hub is energy efficiency, solar panels, battery storage, and also we add EV charging stations. So the EV charging stations is where the revenue generation really comes from. And it has a dual benefit because oftentimes Black communities are in energy efficient deserts, or now EV charging deserts. You've probably heard the term food deserts in the past. And these deserts are expanding in the clean energy space as well due to the industry and market. And so what we're looking for here is to provide solutions that the church now, instead of having to lease their property, having to lease their parking lot away and only getting a fraction of the revenue, they are taking ownership. They can choose how much they charge for the EV charging stations, and they can choose how the revenue, the profit is used in their community, and the result of that has been stark. We've seen such excitement, engagement. One representative from the AME district, one AME district, said that their elders had not been so excited about a solution that he's ever seen. Right? So there is clear excitement about a solution that provides them ownership, provides them revenue generation and more money to impact their community. And we have a goal of reaching 2,000 churches in 2025. And we're starting with 100 churches in Georgia and California this year. So to close out, I want to give you some ideas to think about equity in a way that is more maybe palatable for audiences that don't want to hear that term equity. And first, starting with recognition. As an engineer, before you dig into the ground, and we have it all for our houses as well, you're supposed to call in and do a survey of the ground, right? A geotechnical survey. You got to make sure that there's no wires down there. You got to make sure that there's no, that the soil is okay before you do any construction. That is what recognition is doing. You're understanding the landscape before you start moving in a space. Procedural equity, more closer to Yelp, right? When we use Yelp, when we're looking at different places to go eat, we're getting engagement from people who have been there. We're getting engagement from people who are maybe local. And so you're taking that advice and using that. The same concept is for procedural equity. You want to take the people's advice that are there on the ground and use that to have a better experience. Next is restorative. Every first-year law student has to go through a class about tort law. And tort law is essentially this idea of providing recompense for harm done. And specifically, there's a term called equitable remedy for specific performance. And that says simply that the harm was so great that there has to be monetary, that there has to be not just monetary, but action done to repair the harm that was done. And so this idea is common in our law system, and we're just applying it to our solutions and our clean energy transition. And lastly is distributive. And that is simply targeted marketing, which was in fact created by an African American who I believe was one of the first African Americans to graduate from business school from Harvard University and taught at first African American to graduate from Harvard Business School and taught at Howard University for many years because he couldn't be hired, he wasn't able to get a job in the marketing space. And he came up with target marketing. That's what we're doing with distributive equity, creating solutions for specific groups of people. And so with that, I want to thank you for the time, and please feel free to reach out if you want to talk more about equity, inclusive financing, or accelerating decarbonization. Thank you.
Dr. Kinslow, great job. Couple of quick questions. What
Yeah.
would you say is the biggest barrier to adoption for some of your solutions?
What we found is the biggest barrier is the investment space. Uh, a lot of folks see EV charging revenue uh, as a risky investment, especially when you're talking about within Black communities. They say, "Oh, they don't have EVs." Well, no one's going to purchase EVs if there's no EV charging infrastructure. So it's a chicken and egg problem, and we've had a lot of difficulties obtaining money at scale, at the scale that we want to operate in to provide these solutions for the clean energy hubs in particular. For inclusive financing, the biggest issue has been more of just awareness with utility companies, showing the financials for it so that they can see that this is happening. And we're seeing more and more adoption. Duke Energy in North Carolina is moving on this. All of California has been ordered by their Public Utilities Commission to move on this. We're hearing the rural electric cooperatives have been moving on this for over almost a decade now, and places that red and blue states alike are doing this, as well as Missouri, for instance, is the whole state now has some inclusive financing solutions available. And so really we're seeing a growing attention to it, but it's just been about awareness and dealing with an industry that is quite frankly risk adverse as well. So two risk adverse industries are slowing down this progress. And unfortunately, we can't use risk as an excuse anymore. We're in a climate emergency. We need to move now.
Great point. Great point. Last question. What would you say are some lessons learned? Things that knowing what you know now, probably you would have changed or done differently when you first launched your solution?
It's a great question. When we first launched, our first project was Glad Tidings International Church of God in Christ out in Hayward, California. And we're just about completed that project, but it's taken 3 years. And it took 3 years at first. It took 3 years because of several hiccups. The first was we brought too many people in at once, right? You like to say too many cooks in the kitchen. We were trying to run before we walked in terms of the strategy, in terms of decision making. And so what I would focus on is, and you hear this a lot from entrepreneurs, you hear this a lot from climate investors, is to really, really narrow it down to what you want to do. Someone used the term eat the elephant one bite at a time, right? And so really getting super narrow on what you're trying to do, super focused on it. Who is your customer base? What is the solution? And providing and getting that right first and then expanding. And while it feels slower, the reality is, and from my experience, is that by doing that, you get that done faster, and then you're able to move on with lessons learned to the next thing. And your overarching goal is completed in less time.
We'll leave it at that, one bite at a time. Thank you so much, Dr. Kinslow. Really appreciate your time.
Appreciate you. Thank you.